Joining me now is Texas Democratic Congressman Christian Menefee, fresh off his own primary win last week. Congressman, thank you for being here. And that is where I want to start, with your victory over fellow Congressman Al Green in last week's Texas runoffs. What do you believe was the deciding factor for voters in your district? And what does it say about the district and the direction of your party?
Thank you so much for having me on. Voters in Texas' 18th Congressional District, this is a Houston-centric district, what they knew was Donald Trump and Governor Abbott out in Texas, they created this situation by redrawing the lines and forcing two Democratic leaders into the same district. And when I was going throughout the district, and what I heard from people is they absolutely love Congressman Al Green, but they just selected someone who's going to take the district into the future. Both of us had high favorability. Both of us have done the work in the community, but they were just looking for someone to carry that torch into the future. But they would not have been in this situation were it not for President Trump trying to force seats in Congress to be stripped away from Democratic bases, from black and brown voters, and handed to the Republican Party because he knows his policies are not popular enough to sell to the American people.
And you did face Congressman Green because of last year's redistricting in Texas. Your district remains solidly blue, but what do you make of Democrats' chances across the rest of the state in November?
I think there's going to be a sea change that comes in the state of Texas. If you look at what happened in a Senate district out in Tarrant County, we had extreme success in a special election because people in Texas are sick and tired of being sick and tired under this president and under this governor. We have a set of folks who are running statewide, some exciting candidates from James Talarico to Gina Hinojosa running for governor. And I think that we're going to be able to bring out folks. We're going to turn them out, and you're going to see a lot of people who supported the Republican Party in the last couple of elections flip over to the Democratic side. But it's also incumbent upon us, those folks who serve in office in strong Democratic districts, to make sure that we're turning people out. And when you look at the war in Iran, that President Trump has started a war that nobody asked for, when you look at the impact of tariffs on the average American, folks in my district and throughout the state of Texas are tired of this president making life more expensive for them. We're going to get that message out to voters and hopefully flip the state.
And Congressman, other Democratic states have redrawn their maps in response to Texas, including California, where we are still waiting for those results to come in. But do you worry if redistricting could backfire on Republicans in Texas, it could also backfire in other Democratic states?
Democrats across the country are doing what we have to do to fight fire with fire. This fight started with President Trump knowing that the one big ugly bill could not be sold to the American people because it was the greatest wealth transfer in modern American history, and it cut SNAP benefits and access to Medicaid. And that's why he told governors to go find him more Republican seats to effectively pencil whip representation, stripping communities of their voices. But Democrats have to get down to fight back against this, to meet fire with fire. And I fully support that. But let's be clear, in a race to the bottom, it's always going to be minority underserved communities that lose. And that's why when Democrats get power back, I want to ban partisan gerrymandering throughout this country so that we're never in a situation where politicians are picking their voters instead of the other way around. The last time that was before the House of Representatives, you didn't see a single Republican support it. And I'd argue the reason is because they want to continue gerrymandering across this country. But I'm going to do every single thing I can as a member of Congress to put us in a situation where we have nonpartisan redistricting commissions, data scientists, smart people, not politicians, drawing these maps.
So if Democrats do take back control of the House of Representatives, do you think the party should push for a ban on redistricting?
100%. I would fully support a ban on partisan gerrymandering throughout this country. In a perfect world, we would be drawing as many districts as possible, from 48 to 52% in each party. And the reason is because we've created a system right now where, because of primary elections in gerrymandered districts, most members of Congress have no need. There's no requirement to reach across the aisle and hear from all of their constituents and try to best serve each and every one of them. Nobody should want a situation where 90-some-odd% of the seats in the United States Congress are drawn to hell and will be decided in a partisan primary. I think we should have representation that requires us to talk to all of our constituents, to learn from all of them, and to try to best serve them regardless of their political party. But we're not seeing that right now. So I would fully support a ban on partisan gerrymandering.
Well, let's talk more broadly about the Democratic agenda if the Democrats do take back the House. Leader Jeffries told CNBC that at this moment, the party is not focused on impeaching the president if they regain the majority. Should Democrats commit to taking it off the table entirely?
Absolutely not. What Democrats should commit to, and what I'm committed to, is investigating the president and his cabinet. We have a host of committees that have investigative authority, and we've already been using that muscle while we're in the minority. You saw cabinet officials like Kristi Noem, like Pam Bondi, come before House committees, and because Democratic members were so prepared and held their feet to the fire, many of these folks were forced out of the Trump administration because of the revelations that became clear from those committee meetings. When we get the majority, we should be active in investigating the Trump administration. That includes the president, and it includes all of his cabinet officials. And if those investigations yield evidence that lead to impeachment, then we should absolutely be prepared to do that. We should not be taking that off the table, because if we have a president who's committing high crimes and misdemeanors, and that's what the evidence shows, we have a duty as the United States Congress to hold the president accountable, especially after the United States Supreme Court said that impeachment is the only process to hold a president accountable when he's committing crimes. So I look forward to investigating the president when we get the majority back, and to taking all steps that flow from the evidence.
Let me just ask, do you worry that that could distract from other agenda items, especially if Democrats don't also retake control of the Senate?
No, it's 2026. Most people get their news from social media and spend their time doing 4 or 5 things at the same time. Democrats in Congress have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We're going to present our affirmative vision for this country, one that makes America less expensive, that goes after Trump's tariffs and his war in Iran, which have raised costs on the average American, one which puts money back in the working person's pocket. But we have to be able to, at the same time, hold this president accountable. That is part of the job of Congress. We have 3 co-equal branches of government. We've seen that the United States Supreme Court has already become beholden to President Trump, and the United States Congress has to assert its independence, and that means holding this president accountable through the committee process. And I trust that folks throughout this country are going to expect us to walk and chew gum, and are going to be happy when we do so.
Congressman, I also want to ask you about your recent violation of the Stock Act. You told Notice it was the result of a technological misstep and that you weren't trying to hide anything. You said that you do support a ban on congressional stock trading, so you understand the sensitivity around these disclosures. But what do you say to Americans who are skeptical of Congress's ability to police itself when it comes to this?
We shouldn't be policing ourselves. In fact, I campaigned on no stock trading in Congress, and my trades were to sell all of my stock. I got sworn in February 2nd, and in early February, I divested from all stocks that I owned prior to serving in Congress. It was my first time navigating the online system, and so I completed the disclosure, but there's a final submit button that you have to click, and I didn't click that. So I found out early this week and immediately disclosed, and was happy to be completely transparent about that. It won't happen again now that I've navigated the stock process, but I've already co-sponsored a bill that would ban members of the United States Congress from trading stock, because that simply should not be happening in this country. We shouldn't be able to trade cryptocurrency. We shouldn't be able to trade stock. And people should expect that folks who serve in the United States Congress are only benefiting financially from our salary and not finding outside sources of benefiting ourselves when we're getting insider information from serving in this role.
Congressman Christian Menefee, thanks so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app, or watch live on our YouTube channel.